There's an incredible importance placed on the graphical quality of the games we play, and while photorealism will always be the target for many game devs, there is another visual style that's been just as effective in adding a real vibrancy to our game worlds. I'm talking, of course, about cel shading. The term cel shading refers to a technique used traditionally in 2D animation before we had CGI, where each individual sheet of celluloid was hand-painted by the artist. This was how most of those beautiful animated classics that we know and love today were created. In games, the effect uses non-photorealistic lighting to separate individual textures into a smaller, simpler spectrum of solid block colours. When combined with inkish black outlines, games take on the look and feel of a cartoon or comic book. The first high-profile game to use a cel shading technique was the PlayStation action-adventure Fear Effect, released in the year 2000.
Hong Kong, a familiar place in another time.
Developer Chronos Digital was seeking to conjure up the feel of a Japanese anime for their cyberpunk tale of the female mercenary Hanatsu the Shell.
So much for Jin being reliable.
I'll go find him.
Giving their characters a 2D animated look was an inspired move that garnered the game a fair amount of critical praise. Looking at it now, it seems somewhat rudimentary, but at the time it was an effective alternative to the uneasy attempts at realism kicking around in other blocky 3D games of the day. Fear Effect had only hinted at what was to come. It was Jet Set Radio on the Sega Dreamcast console that would firmly cement cel shading in the global gaming lexicon.
Sup?
Winning the Excellence in Visual Arts Award at the 2001 Game Developers' Choice Awards, Jet Set Radio was praised by critics the world over for its refreshing visuals. Opting for a more stylised flat colour look across the entire game world was not only a way to save on memory and processing power, but it had the handy side effect of giving the game true artistic flair. Around the same time came Wacky Races, based on the Hanna-Barbera cartoon. Cel shading was the perfect solution, bringing this cartoon favourite to life. The technique had quickly become popular, and publishers looked upon it as a neat marketing angle. Cel Damage from Electronic Arts in 2002 even referred to it in the game's own title. What was an otherwise ho-hum vehicular combat game had been transformed into something more interesting, at least on the surface. In a few short years, cel shading had gone from an arty technique to a bankable visual style, and it was being used as a way to spruce up titles that perhaps lacked personality, even racing sims like Auto Modelista on the PS2. But cel shading wasn't always going to be welcomed with open arms. In 2003, Nintendo released The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker on the GameCube, surprising everyone with its artistic direction. Ocarina of Time had hardly been super realistic, but the switch to a more stylised, cartoony Link was met with a rush of criticism from some gamers who saw it as a backward step. Zelda fans were aging and they wanted the games to grow up too, but how could you honestly knock a game with art direction as beautiful as this? Wind Waker would go on to win a number of awards for its visuals, and rightly so. However, Nintendo seemed shaken, and they placated fans at their E3 conference the following year by showing off a more realistic-looking Link, a tease of what would become Twilight Princess on the Wii. While some Western developers cooled off on using cel shading for fear of it being associated with a dumbing down process, more adventurous Japanese developers would continue to embrace it. Games like Rogue Galaxy from Level 5, Okami from Clover Studio, No More Heroes by Grasshopper Manufacture, and more recently Catherine by Atlas, have proven how visually striking and downright gorgeous a cel-shaded world can be. It's the perfect way to evoke the feel of an anime, graphic novel, cartoon show, or comic book series. It's fair to say we've reached a point where cel shading is no longer considered a novelty. It's an accepted artistic alternative. It lets artists break the shackles of realism and bring their elaborate concepts to life with little compromise. The first Borderlands is a great example. It may no longer be technically correct to group these multitudes of variations on the technique under one banner, but when used creatively, cel shading can really give a game some irresistible artistic punch.